Oh, okay, guys. So we are going to start learning about the heart. So first we'll learn about its structure and part of its function as well. So we'll do a little bit of both today. Primarily we're focusing on the labeling here and just knowing the general functions of each structure. And then later this week we'll look at how, like, the path of blood through the heart and through the body into the lungs and all of that. And so we'll more so trace the path and use colors to show the different types of blood, oxygenated versus deoxygenated, flowing through. But for now, it's just kind of the vocabulary, the structure, all of that. I'm going to start with a couple vocab, like descriptive terms, and then we're going to hop into the left side of the heart today. We'll do the right side of the heart tomorrow. So today we'll have a little bit more content than tomorrow, but it'll get us a good start, and then we can start practicing one part of the heart. Hopefully you know some of these from biology, or some come back. Others might be newer because we'll go in a little bit more depth. So just to start, here's the heart. It's about the size of your fist, usually like 14 to 15 centimeters long, 9 centimeters wide. And it is surrounded laterally, like on the sides, by your lungs, posteriorly in the back by your spine, and anteriorly by your sternum. So the sternum is that central bone. It kind of looks like a tie that your ribs are connected to and moving outward from. It isn't perfectly centered. You can see it tilts a little bit to the left. Remember, this is going to be the left side of the heart. This will be the right, because we have to put ourselves in anatomical position. So actually it might be helpful to just label this the left and this the right to start. And maybe we'll also give this a Unit 6 Lecture 1. That will be our title. Basically, it's part 1 of Lecture 1, but we'll get started there. So anyways, yeah, it does hang over to the left a little bit. This is called the apex. We'll talk about it, but it's to the left of the sternum a bit. And so this is where you'll often have your heartbeat taken with the stethoscope, and it's about 5 or so ribs down. So we'll take a look at that too. But anyhow, we'll start with letter U, and we're going to look at these walls of the heart to start. So letter U is where we will start. Just going to write this over here. And maybe we can circle them as we go. So U. This is called the epicardium. So think about like cardiac, cardium, that has to do with the heart. So epicardium is the outermost layer of the heart's walls. And I have to say that because the heart's also surrounded by something outside the walls called the pericardium, and the pericardium is basically like this fibrous layer that protects it. So there is more layers outside of this, but in terms of the heart's walls, this is the outer layer of the walls. And it's primarily made of connective tissue. Okay. Here, letter V is the middle layer of the heart's walls. You can see it's really thick, and you can probably assume because of its thickness that it's the one responsible for pumping. So it's going to be our muscular layer. So letter V is the myocardium, and it's the thickest layer of the heart walls. It is the middle layer, and it is the muscle tissue or muscular layer. Muscular because it's used for pumping the blood. Okay. And finally, letter W is the endocardium, and this is the innermost layer of the heart, primarily epithelial tissue. Just like we had epithelial tissue lining the respiratory system, we often see this as our inner lining, epithelial tissue, and it lines all the chambers, all 4 chambers of the heart. Okay, the heart is hollow. We have these hollow tubes. It just ends up being filled with blood. So it's like this muscular structure, hollow, filled with blood, and lots of little structures internally for helping keep the blood separated and compartmentalized, for keeping it going in the right direction, all of that stuff. Okay, so those are the walls. And this little piece here, since we're down on these last few letters, we'll cover it as well. Letter Y. This is called the apex. So you might hear things like the apical heartbeat. This is where they would take your heartbeat with a stethoscope. It's between the 5th intercostal ribs, meaning like between the 5th and 6th rib, if you count starting from your collarbone going down. And so usually there, and about 7.5 centimeters to the left of your sternum, that bone down the center, is where that stethoscope would go for measuring the apical heartbeat. Anyways, this is the distal end of the heart at the 5th intercostal, meaning between the ribs, space. And it's on the left side of the sternum. Okay, so that's kind of just some background information on the heart. Now we're going to go into the left side of the heart, like I said, we're going to cover today. And so with the left side of the heart, we can just kind of do like a little title, I guess, here. The left side of the heart is in charge of bringing blood, oxygen-rich blood, from the lungs to the heart to the body cells for cellular respiration and giving our cells energy to survive and keep us alive. But again, we just talked about the respiratory system, right? The respiratory system, we get the oxygen in at the alveoli, it crosses into the capillaries, and that's where it's going to go from those capillaries into the heart, and then we'll see how it gets to those body cells as well. So we're going to start with letters N and E. So we can go up here, letters N and E, okay? So both of those are going to have blood coming from the lungs, going into this chamber right here. For E, it kind of cuts behind and into here. And so I'm just going to draw some arrows pointing in, showing blood's coming in these 4 tubes. So we can go down here. We'll label N and E. And these are the pulmonary veins. You may remember from biology, we often think like veins go V to the heart. So we're going to the heart from the lungs here. So these are 4 veins that carry O2-rich blood from the lungs to the left atrium. So we'll see a left and right atrium, we'll see a left and right ventricle. Atrium are the upper chambers of the heart, ventricles are the lower. And I always think A comes before V in the alphabet. So we're going to the atrium and then we'll move our way down to the ventricles and out, and the same thing on the other side. Now from here, we're going to hop into that left atrium, so we'll define that next. That's letter M. So again, both of these pulmonary veins go to letter M, the left atrium. And the left atrium is just like a chamber of the heart that receives, before E except after C, that receives blood from the lungs and sends it to the left ventricle. So I just wrote L ventricle. Sends it to the left ventricle, this chamber down here. Now, if you look at the walls of the heart, you'll see in different areas, they're different like widths. So here you can see how muscular this myocardium, this middle layer is. But then if you look at the atrium, it's a much thinner myocardium, a much thinner layer. That's because this is the muscular portion of the wall. And this left atrium only has to send blood from here to here, not very far. So it doesn't need a lot of muscle. So we'll see it's nice and thin in the atrium. And from here, we're going to have the blood go from the left atrium down into the left ventricle. Notice it passes through here. Since these are different compartments, we do have like a door, like a flap, a one-way door. I'm going from here into this left ventricle. So from the left atrium, we're going to cross through one of our 4 valves of the heart. And this is called the mitral or bicuspid valve. The mitral or bicuspid valve. Okay, so that's letter O. So valves, or just think of them as like the one-way doorway. It's like a one-way doggy door. This is our first of 4. So the mitral or bicuspid valve is the thickest and strongest valve. It is 2 flaps. That's why it's called a bicuspid, 2 cusps. And it separates the left atrium and the left ventricle. Okay. The reason we want to think structure and function quite a bit in this lecture, that it's the thickest and the strongest of the valves, is because look at how big this muscle is here. This left ventricle is going to be pumping blood out of the aorta up here and to the rest of our body. That's a far distance, considering we have to go to our toes, up to our head, all different places. It needs a lot of force. So if this ventricle has a lot of force going upward and outward, we need a really strong valve here to make sure that there's no backflow into this atrium. So that's why it's the thickest and the strongest. Now notice here we have like these little stringy fibrous pieces hanging down and connected to the walls of the heart and the ventricle. And these are like little cords that are going to be pulling these valves open when the time is right during that heartbeat. That thump is the blood moving from compartment to compartment. So when the timing's right, once this left atrium is filled, this will open, allowing the blood into here, and then it will close. Now, these will be pulled on to open those valves by these little muscles here. So we'll define those next. I is labeled over here on the right side, but we can see they're over on both sides. So I, we can see here and here. So we're gonna pop over and do that one. And letter I labels what's called the chordae they're called the chordae tendineae, but I just say chordae tendineae for spelling purposes. Tendineae, E-A-E. It's interesting spelling, a tough one. And these are going to attach to the bicuspid and tricuspid valves. And so we haven't learned about the tricuspid valve, but it's the same location just on the right side. So not these valves, but these 2 valves are the tricuspid and bicuspid valves. And it's going to prevent them from opening the wrong way. Going to pull on the flaps and it's going to pull them downward, but really it's not actually doing the pulling. What's doing the pulling is these muscles. These are more just like strings that get pulled to pull the flaps down. They're like the middleman. So we'll flip onto the back and we'll do letter S. These are those little muscles. Letter S. These are those little muscles that are pulling on the chordae tendineae to open up those flaps. I'm going to go onto the back for S. And these are called the papillary muscles. Okay? And the papillary muscles attach to the innermost layer of the heart, the endocardium. And on the other end, they attach to the chordae tendineae. And they pull on the chordae tendineae, preventing prolapse, which means preventing the backflow of blood into the atrium. So we only want to go from the atrium to the ventricle and then out of the heart to the body cells. We don't want it going backwards. And so that's what these papillary muscles help to do. They pull on the chordae tendineae, which then pull on the valve, which then allows the blood to only move in one direction. And they'll stop pulling and allow that flap to close afterwards. We'll watch a video on this in class. It'll be really nice and clear. It's pretty cool to see. Okay. So from there, we're going to continue on. So we've gone from the pulmonary veins into the left atrium, down through the bicuspid or mitral valve, and into the left ventricle. So that's where we are now, okay? So the left ventricle is labeled by letter R. This is the left ventricle. It is 3 times thicker than the right ventricle, as we saw. Oh, actually, I showed you about how it's thicker than the atrium, but you can also see how it's way thicker than the right ventricle. We'll learn about tomorrow how the right ventricle just pumps this blood actually to the lungs. So that's not very far from the heart, whereas this is pumping the blood all throughout the body. So that's why it's so large. So it's 3 times thicker than the right ventricle. It forms the apex of the heart, that tip on the left-hand side, and it pumps blood through the aorta and to the body cells. Okay, providing them oxygen for cellular respiration to make that ATP. Next we have letter P, and I'll show you it on the front in a second, but it's called the aortic, let me try that again, AORTIC, aortic semilunar, like half moon, semilunar valve. It's different structurally. Again, we'll look at the structures of these valves in class in a picture on the PowerPoints, but it's different structurally than these bicuspid and tricuspid valves, so it's more similar to this valve over here, just a little bit different structurally. And it's called the aortic semilunar valve, and it prevents backflow, that's what all these valves do, into the left ventricle. So again, it ensures that the blood only flows in one direction. It will trap any blood trying to flow back. And so it's going to be right here, letter P, and it goes right here. It's separating the aorta from the left ventricle, and any blood that gets pumped through here will only go out. It will not come back down because of this. Last but not least, we have letter K. This huge, huge, huge artery towards the top. Notice it has 3 little pieces above it, or 3 little tubes. They each have their own names. We won't worry about those. And actually, I think it has one on the back as well, now that I'm blinking. But, however, yeah, it does. It has a huge, it has the huge tube down the back. Oh, yeah, here it is. It comes out down here. So this is where this blood is coming out. We can even draw arrows. This is part of it down here, the aorta, and then these are the other entrance or exits out as well. All heading to the body. Okay. And this is the one like in movies when you see somebody like their throat gets slit and or like their head gets cut off. Like obviously it's like not fully real, but like their head gets cut off and there's just like blood squirting everywhere. It's because of this aorta. It's like this huge muscle's pumping blood upward and they get cut right here and all that blood just like spews everywhere. It's like a really rapid pace because they're cutting these arteries close to the aorta. Anyhow, after getting all dark there, we'll flip back to the back for our last one. Letter K is the aorta. AORTA, and it's the largest artery in the body. Artery away, veins to the heart, arteries away from the heart, and it sends oxygenated blood to the body cells. Okay? So all these structures that we just talked about are all part of the left side of the heart, and their job is to take this oxygen-rich blood from the lungs, it goes through the heart so that it can get pumped to the body cells. So it's kind of like the heart's kind of like this directional, it's taking this oxygen to the blood, it's figuring out the right direction to send it, and it's pumping it so that it gets there more rapidly. Then if it just went from the lungs to the body cells, there'd be nothing to pump it, nothing to flow there, nothing to get it all the way up to our head, nothing to get it all the way down to our toes. But the heart does that, and it keeps it separated from that deoxygenated blood, which the heart's responsible for as well. And that's what the right side of the heart's responsible for. So we'll look at that tomorrow.